Hi everybody, it's Chris, and welcome to another video by the Infinity System. Today's episode covers recovered memories, trauma memories. Are these memories of abuse real? Are they accurate? Is there any scientific basis to show that memories, trauma memories, are encapsulated and locked away, which is one of the central problems with DID. This has always been a very major point of contention in what's called the memory wars, basically between the therapists and the Western established science, like all of the professors and the universities and the accredited institutions who state that DID can't possibly be real because delayed memories are not reliable, or in some cases don't exist. Now, a delayed memory is a forgotten traumatic event that is later recalled, either naturally, say for example a flashback, or in therapy itself. Warnings about the reliability of delayed memories are endorsed by the APA, which is the American Psychiatric Association. They point to research that shows that memory is unreliable, and that people can be led into false memory recall. For example, they often cite lie detectors, which have been used for years to determine whether or not someone is lying. But the trouble is that there's a lot of biological factors that can go into whether or not a lie detector test is accurate. Oftentimes, if the person being given the test really does believe what they're saying, whether it's real or not, it will come back as a true or a telling the truth reading. So, while there is evidence to point to memory being unreliable, these are normal everyday memories, generally, that they're pointing to. They kind of leave that part out. Trauma memories are a different beast entirely, because they do have that biochemical basis. There is a hard basis, in fact. The APA and others will often cite overzealous therapists who are blamed for leading their clients into false recall of trauma memories by asking, say, general or misleading questions that are designed to funnel their patient's recall into what the therapist supposedly wants it to be to support whatever their current work is or theory, whatever excuse. However, on the opposite end of the spectrum, the therapists who do specialize in adult survivors of trauma and CSA and other PTSD victims state that this view does not rule out the possibility that delayed memories are factual, and that the dissociative amnesia is often found within their patients. Now, dissociative amnesia is basically what we've been talking about in other episodes, which is where the impact of the trauma has burned the event onto the neurology of the brain on a biochemical basis or a neurochemical basis, and set up an amnesic barrier to lock that memory away because the brain, the consciousness, is not capable of dealing with it at that point. So the amygdala, which is a section of our brain which is responsible for dealing with memory and the memory cabinet, as it were, locks that memory away for later review when it judges that the circumstances are safe. Ironically, this seems to happen a lot towards the latter end of life, like when, say, an individual or a trauma survivor moves into their 40s, where the life circumstances have basically stabilized at that point, and the amygdala goes, it's time to deal with this. So it opens up the file cabinet, pulls out the file, or an alter in this case, and goes, here we go, we're going to work on this. So the therapists are saying, yeah, sorry guys, but your view that memory is unreliable does not rule out the possibility that these are factual. So where is the actual proof here? Is there any actual proof to be found supporting that dissociative amnesia is a real thing and not just, forgive us, in the heads of the patients? As time has went on, the debate has settled into the hard scientists on the false memory side, and the therapists backing delayed memory on the other, theoretical versus the actual. But studies over the course of decades, dating back to the 80s and even before that, which were published in leading journals and peer-reviewed, have shown that there is considerable evidence that backs the argument of trauma therapists who support delayed memory and delayed memory recovery. As recent as February of this year, a study published by Melissa Kaufman, who is head of the Dissociative Disorders and Trauma Research Program at McLean Hospital, which itself is affiliated with the Harvard Medical School, in the Journal of American Psychology, the American Journal of Psychiatry, which is the actual journal of the APA, discussed the use of MRI imaging, magnetic resonance imaging. You may have heard of this growing up. Basically, it's where they stick you in a high power magnetic field and it scans your body. She published a study using MRI imaging to study the effects of dissociative amnesia, depersonalization, derealization, and other dissociative states. The MRI study and others, which have been conducted over the past 20 years, found that PTSD sufferers with dissociative amnesia exhibit reduced activity in the amygdala, that part of the brain that we were just talking about that is responsible for the processing of emotions and memories, and a corresponding increase in activity in the prefrontal cortex of the brain, which is in charge of concentration and other executive functioning skills, the day-to-day concentration, paying attention, fine motor, things like that, staying on track. Curiously, PTSD sufferers without lapses in their trauma memories often exhibit the reverse: increased activity in the amygdala and decreased activity in the prefrontal cortex. PTSD, we've covered this in other episodes. PTSD is the first level of structural dissociation, post-traumatic stress disorder. You have one ANP and one EP. If you're not familiar with what those are, hit up our video, Who in the Hell Are You People? Where we cover alters and how they're formed and what an ANP and what an EP are. Basically, an ANP is the apparently normal part. The person without the trauma and then with. The EP is that memory of the event, the emotional part that has been locked away by the brain, by the amygdala, because it goes, we can't deal with this right now. So PTSD can be experienced by anyone, regardless of age, who has had a traumatic event, a singular traumatic event, a first-level structural dissociation. Now, these findings have been backed up by a recent study which was completed by Stanford University School of Medicine. Again, another highly accredited institution, which has identified the area affected by dissociative behaviors as the posteromedial cortex, which is a small layer of deeply implanted cells which are specifically responsible for dissociative conditions and dissociation itself. But despite these studies providing hard scientific data identifying the posteromedial complex as the circuit responsible for dissociation, false memory researchers, those that hold that the memories are not reliable, remain skeptical of the MRI studies, holding instead that intact autobiographical memories are rarely, if ever, repressed. In other words, you don't repress the traumatic event. It's there, and you remember it just like you remember any other event, no matter how traumatic it was. They're holding that the dissociative amnesia just does not exist at all, ignoring all of the hard science. This is something that any DID system will know is fundamentally untrue. Otherwise, where are all these trauma memories coming from? Some take it a step farther, and instead of merely ignoring the MRI study's data results and the hard evidence that they found, proponents of the false memory explanation, such as Henry Otgar of the Maastricht University in the Netherlands, explain the hard data from the MRI studies away as biological evidence just for the claims of patients who report memory loss due to dissociation, holding instead that there are many alternate explanations for these MRI correlations. Retrograde amnesia, for instance, where the amnesia is caused by brain injuries, which, in scientific jargon, is the same as saying, We're ignoring the hard evidence by splitting hairs over the actual causes and sticking to willful ignorance and smokescreens rather than challenge the status quo of medical professional disbelief. Never mind that the status quo perception of false memory is directly tied to the satanic panic of the 1980s, where a group of therapists were responsible for creating false memories in the children that they interviewed. If you're interested, Google it. It's far too complex to go into here. Interesting story, though. So check that out if you're not already familiar. Serious research into DID and dissociative amnesia and even PTSD was only just getting attention from researchers such as Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, author of the book The Body Keeps the Score: Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma, which is widely considered to be one of, if not the definitive works on DID and trauma. Or not DID, I'm sorry, PTSD and trauma, although he does go into basically what dissociative conditions are. In order to counter these specious arguments, Professor Kaufman and the researchers from the Clean Hospital fed the MRI data from over 60 women with histories of child abuse, all of whom have been diagnosed with PTSD, into a computer utilizing an AI algorithm to develop a model of the connections between the various brain networks in the studies. The results of the AI analysis models are compelling. That severe dissociative symptoms involve connections between two specific brain networks that are constantly active. The default mode network, which activates when the mind is at rest and is responsible for remembering the past and thinking about the future, and the frontoparietal control network, which is involved in problem solving. The Clean study backs up a previous study, also using computer AI to study dissociative systems. A September 2019 paper published in the British Journal of Psychiatry that used MRI scans of over 70 women, 32 of which were already diagnosed with DID, and using 43 controls, or women without DID, showed that the results of the study were profound. That the AI, using the included MRI datasets of the test subjects, could accurately determine with a 75% probability between the real DID patients and those in the control group. Now, while Professor Kaufman maintains that more research does need to be carried out before clinicians can begin using the technique to assess possible DID or dissociative sufferers, but she does hold hope that the study is the first step on the pathway to precision medicine in our field. You'll find the sources for all of this down below in the description, so be sure to check them out if you're interested in reading some really technical stuff. Again, Data goes looking for all of this info, but he does make sure to list all of the links to basically tell you guys we're not just spouting this stuff out of our ears here. So be sure to check those out. So what does this tell us? This tells us that not only have scientists located the specific region of the brain that is responsible for dissociative conditions, but also found data that backs up what trauma therapists have been saying all along, that dissociative amnesia is a thing, that there are actual changes to the brain going on when the split happens, when the amygdala locks away that trauma memory because the conscious mind is not capable of dealing with it at this point. The body and the mind is not safe enough in order to deal with this memory, to deal with this experience. Now, of course, this stuff leaks out. This is why PTSD sufferers will often experience recurring thoughts, recurring images. They'll have nightmares, night terrors, sleep paralysis, on and on and on. As we've covered before in Trauma Doesn't Lie, these are all physical symptoms of the underlying trauma that are coming out. Relationship problems that are coming out because of the events that have been buried by the amygdala and split off, coming forward now that the brain has judged that the body and the mind are in safe circumstances, or circumstances that are safe enough to begin working on these memories, which coincides with a couple of things. As we've covered in the Trauma Doesn't Lie, sorry, but we're kind of brushing over subjects here that we covered in depth there, so go check it out. But the brain, the amygdala decides, okay, I'm going to open up that file cabinet now. And we were talking with our therapist on this, and she said that it's most common, that she's found with her patient clientele over the years, that generally this happens when the body turns about 40 years of age, when the life circumstances have stabilized enough that the amygdala goes, hey, okay, I'm going to unlock this file cabinet and welcome to hell. This is exactly what happened to us. In our cases, a life stressor event caused the resurgence of these symptoms and caused those traumatic elements, those dissociative, amnesic barriers to begin to break down and for that trauma to leak through. In our case, it was the death of our first wife. These triggering symptoms can be anything from a birth, a death, a marriage, a divorce, any major change, moving, for example, that will upset the system and their sense of continuity. So that's basically how both the amygdala locks these memories away, and now we've got physical scientific proof through these MRI studies of not only the fact that, yes, this really does happen, but here's the area of the brain, here's the layer of cells where this actually occurs, that the amygdala is accessing, and, of course, the corresponding changes in the posterior medial complex. So we've got two areas of the brain dealing with each other that are showing marked differences between those PTSD sufferers who don't have multiple experiences, only have the one experience, and those of us deeper down the dissociative disorder spectrum, OSDD systems, and DID, eventually at the bottom, or a tertiary structural dissociation. Again, we cover this much more in detail and go into the theory of structural dissociation in our video, Who in the Hell Are You People? Alters and All About Them, where we explain the theory of structural dissociation and what the various types of, or what the two different types of alters or experiences created by this. The apparently normal part, the part that is responsible for dealing with the outside world that does not contain the trauma memories that the amygdala has filed away, and the EPs, or emotional part, that part of your awareness, of your consciousness that contains that encoded moment and has it put away. So not only do we have the scientific proof that it does exist, where it exists, how it exists, but also a marked difference showing that dissociative amnesia is a thing. Otherwise, there would not be the reversal in effects on the amygdala and the posterior medial cortex. If there wasn't anything going on there, there wouldn't be any changes between PTSD sufferers without the amnesic barriers and those that have it, such as DID systems. So basically, that's what we have for you today. We like to keep you guys up to date on exactly what's going on out there, what research is being done, what isn't being done. It can be very hard to find sometimes any new information. A lot of it is being done overseas, but even so, it's obvious that DID and the dissociative disorders and dissociative memories are still treated with a lot of skepticism by the mainstream psychiatric community. And while this is slowly starting to change, and they're slowly starting to catch up with what we knew all along, at least it does give us some hope that this will end the stigma somewhat and help people understand that DID and dissociative disorders are real, that we're not just making this up, and we're not just faking our events, the memories that we remember, our alters, and our symptoms. So, if you're out there, if you're feeling a little pressed on and you're listening to people or even family members going, oh, this can't be real, you know what? Point them towards those studies. We've got all of the links down in the description below, so feel free to check those out. That's it for this time, folks. We'd like to thank you for tuning in, and as always, we remind you that you are loved, that you are strong, and that you are not alone. I'm Chris. Thanks for watching.